In this video, we'll learn about what cubing a number means, as well as the inverse of cubing, and how to use this with equations and how signs affect cubing a number. So in the first video about squares and square roots, we learned that the name squares comes from the fact that the number represents the area of a square that has that whole number side length. So then we saw a bunch of different squares and talked about the area of those numbers. I'm not going to do that for cubes, but we could. Hopefully you're thinking the three-dimension version of that. So perfect cubes would represent the volume of different three-dimensional cubes. So cubes, remember, are the 3D version of a square, so every side would be the same. So squaring a number means multiplying by itself. Cubing a number means multiplying by itself a total of 3 times. So that's why you see it as that little 3 of an exponent, so 3 total times. To do this on your calculator, you're going to want to use that caret button. So for something like 1 cubed, you certainly could type out that expanded form, but better would be to say 1 and then caret 3. So if you do that, you see you get an answer of 1. 2 cubed would mean 2 times 2 times 2. If you evaluate that, it gives you an answer of 8. So I went ahead and finished off this list. I would encourage you to type a couple of these out on your calculator just to try them. If you are using a phone calculator instead of a handheld one, again, you'll want to turn it sideways, and it has its own cube button, so it looks like an X cubed on your phone. So try a couple of these out. As far as getting to know these, you're probably going to be better at memorizing the perfect square numbers and be a little more calculator dependent when it comes to cubes until you start using them more further down the road. So you've probably guessed that since the inverse of squaring is called square rooting, the inverse of cubing is called cube rooting. And what that looks like, it's the same little radical symbol, that's what that's called. It looks like a little check mark, but with a 3 on the outside. So that's a cube root. And as far as what that means, it means you're looking for what number multiplied by itself a total of 3 times gives you that answer. So for cube rooting on your calculator, I'll show you both. You are going to actually type that 3 first. So if I was trying to type the cube root of 729, I would hit 3 and then the second key, and you're going to use the caret key. So above it, it has this little X symbol with the radical. So what you're doing is essentially putting the 3 in for that spot when you type it first. So 3, second caret, and then 729 for this example. So again, I encourage you to try this just so you can make sure that you're calculating it correctly. And here you should get an answer of 9. If you're doing it on your phone, it has its own button here. So type that number, then hit that. So the cube root of 64 should give you an answer of 4. And then the cube root of 216 should give you 6. So again, I encourage you to try a couple of these and make sure you get that right answer. So next we're going to look at how positives and negatives affect squares and cubes, and we talked about this in the squaring video. So when you square a number, again, it means it's multiplying by itself. So something like 5 squared would be 5 times 5, which is a positive 25. If you were to take a negative 5 squared, that would be negative 5 times negative 5. And here, since you're multiplying by itself, those negatives are going to cancel to also give you a positive 25. Cubes, however, take it literally one step further. So 5 cubed would be 5 times 5 times 5, which is positive 125. Negative 5 cubed would be negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5. So here, the first 2 would cancel out to be a positive, but there's still 1 left over. So by comparison, cubing a negative number will actually give you a negative answer. So it's different than squares. So what that means is we can do something with cubes that we can't do with squares. I would encourage you to have your calculator in hand and try to type these 2 problems. Square root of 100 should be no problem. You should get a 10 as your answer. If you try to square root a negative, and again, as a reminder, you're going to hit second x squared and then your number. So second x squared and then negative 100, your calculator tells you something called a domain error. And what that means is it's not possible to do. If we think about why it's not possible, you're looking for a number times itself to give you that number inside. No number times itself is ever going to give you a negative number. If you have a positive times a positive is positive. And if you have a negative times negative is a positive. So something like this can't happen, and it's not possible. By comparison, if you try cubing something, so again, that on your calculator, you're going to hit 3 second caret and then your number, works for both. The cube root of 1,000 is 10, and the cube root of negative 1,000 is negative 10. There's no problems there, since cubing a negative does actually give you a negative answer, where it doesn't with a square. So what that means is solving these problems is going to be handled a little bit differently with cubes. Remember, with squares, we learned that if you have something like x squared equals 16, we have two answers to that, because both positive 4 and negative 4 get squared or multiplied by itself to equal positive 16. So we had to differentiate between the two. If we only wanted the positive, which is more practical in real life situations, you use this symbol, that principal square root, and know to only put 4. Cubing, however, is going to be different. You're never going to have two answers with cubes because the sign actually matters. So this row of examples are the same thing. Here I would have an answer of only positive 2 and only positive 2 here, whereas if I have a negative number, that answer would only be the negative. That would work. So unlike squares, when you're cubing something, the symbol and an equation are the same. Again, that's because the sign actually matters. So if we look down here at these two equations, my answer for the cube root of 8, right, because that's how I would solve this, taking the inverse of both sides, would be only a positive 2. Whereas on that next example, it would only be negative 2. I no longer have two answers. And same thing if you just had that symbol. So the cube root of 8 is 2, the cube root of negative 8 is negative 2. So when you're solving problems with cubes, there is no difference between the symbol and the equation. There's only ever going to be one answer, and that answer is always going to match your original sign. Again, before we evaluate these, just a reminder for your calculator, it's 3 second caret and then your number. Or if you're using your phone, it's actually easier because it has its own button. So try a couple of these out. Make sure you get the same thing. The cube root of negative 27 would be negative 3. If we were to take the cube root to solve both sides, the cube root of positive 64 is 4. The cube root of 125 is 5, only 5, remember that. And then finally, if I were to cube root both sides to solve, I would get negative 7. So just in summary on squares, cubes, and the roots, squaring a negative gives you a positive answer. So because of this, a problem like x squared equals a number has two answers, because both a positive and a negative work. So because of that, when we only want the positive, we have a principal square root, which is just that symbol and only means the positive answer. Cubing something, however, if you cube a negative, it gives you a negative answer. So because of this, there's always ever going to be one answer, and it's going to be the same sign as the original. So if I were to cube root 125, since it's positive, I would only include positive 5 as the answer. So there, no problems taking the cube root of a negative. This answer would be 5. This answer would be negative 5.